This program is made possible by the loyal financial support of the friends and partners of Family Policy Institute.
You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world.
Good evening and welcome to Salt and Light. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to be talking about the South African Law Reform Commission's report on adult prostitution. And to help us talk through this, I've invited Advocate Dellene Clarke, who is a Principal State Law Advisor at the South African Law Reform Commission. Advocate Clarke, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, we're talking about the report that was released on the 26th of May by the Minister of Justice, and this was an investigation into adult prostitution that lasted about 7 to 8 years. Your recommendations are widely known, and that is you're recommending keeping it fully criminalized and also coupled with exit programs to help women out of the sex trade. This report was heavily criticized by pro-prostitution groups, and we're not surprised by that because they're pushing for full decriminalization. But many of our viewers hear about the Law Reform Commission, the work you do. Besides the prostitution issue, you have worked on a number of other issues. But perhaps we want to start at the mandate of the South African Law Reform Commission. Who are you and what do you do?
Thank you, Errol. I think that context is really important. And just to sketch the context around the Law Reform Commission, it is a statutory body that's established in terms of its own legislation. It is housed within the Department of Justice, though. Our commissioners are appointed by the President, and the commissioners are all highly distinguished judges and lawyers. They are assisted by a secretariat, and the secretariat is staffed by senior lawyers that are seconded by the Department of Justice, of which I'm one. In terms of the purpose of the Commission is tasked with investigating and researching all branches of the law with a view to advising the whole of government, and particularly the Minister of Justice, though, with regards to developing, improving, modernizing and reforming the law.
So in other words, the Law Reform Commission is tasked with bringing some of the laws that predates our Constitution, that was signed into law in 1996, bringing those laws in line with the Constitution.
That's right, yes.
Okay, so you're not a Chapter 9 institution. That's one of the fallacies that people have, like the Public Protector's Office and the Human Rights Commission. You're not that.
No, we're tasked with reforming the law. So you'd find that legislation such as the Children's Act, the review of the Child Care Act became the Children's Act, the brand new trafficking legislation, the legislation commonly known as POPI, the Sexual Offences Act of 2007, all originated from the Law Reform Commission.
Okay, so let's get to the report on adult prostitution. When did it start? When did this investigation start, and who commissioned it?
I think in terms of context, once again, it's very important to unpack it. The commissioning of the investigation was originally by the then Deputy Minister of Justice. In 1997, which takes us way back when, the Law Reform Commission was requested to investigate sexual offences by and against children. When the issue paper was published in 1998, the Department of Justice and the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Constitutional Development, under the chairperson of that Portfolio Committee, asked the Commission to expand the investigation completely to review all sexual offences in South Africa. That includes sexual offences in the statute book and sexual offences then in the common law. And then in addition to that, also look at all the processes in the criminal justice system to see where we need to tweak it in terms of implementation, so that you don't just have law, but you actually have the realization of that law.
So am I right in saying that there's a number of laws in Sexual Offences Act and many other laws that's dealing with prostitution, and what the Law Reform Commission is trying to bring one comprehensive law that can regulate this issue?
Yes, but to step back, sorry if I may just take you one step back though.
Okay.
In terms of the larger investigation, because it was such a big investigation, we had to break it up into 4 parts. And the 4 parts of that investigation dealt with sexual offences in the broad, looking at the processes like your Tuduzela centres and giving a blueprint for all of that. And then your offences like rape, offences that were not codified, putting that on the statute book. For example, making a gender-neutral offence of rape for men also. So we had the Sexual Offences Act promulgated in 2007. We then had the third part of this larger investigation looking at adult prostitution, and then the fourth part looking at pornography in children. When we come to the investigation on adult prostitution, we're looking at two parts there. The one is to look at the fragmented law, because we have two pieces of legislation that regulate adult prostitution in South Africa. The one being a 1957 piece of legislation, and the other being the 2007 Sexual Offences Act, which only criminalises the buyers. And then we were asked to look at policy reform. Is the law as it currently is, does it match with constitutional principles? And do we need to look at alternative policies? But all in all, we were asked to, underpinning this, look at prevent, deter, and reduce the prevalence of prostitution.
Okay, so that was your mandate.
Yes.
To prevent, deter, and
reduce
prostitution. And so you launched this investigation when?
That investigation started off as one of the four parts in 1999.
Okay.
An issue paper was published in 2001, and then concentration was given to the first two parts of the larger sexual offences investigation, which then brought about the Sexual Offences Act in 2007. The third part then resumed again looking at adult prostitution, and then gave rise to a discussion paper on adult prostitution in 2009. And that culminated in a report on the adult prostitution in 2014, which was then handed over to the Department of Justice.
Okay, so I remember that 2009 investigation. The Law Reform Commission visited a number of provinces, and you had workshops. I participated in the 1 year in the Western Cape, and I remember Thuli Madinsela was the convener for the Law Reform Commission. I think that was before she was appointed the Public Protector of South Africa. And there I remember putting out the paper, and there were 4 options that people had to respond to, and that was decriminalization, full decriminalization, criminalization, partial decriminalization, and legalization. And I remember in the workshop that we were in, the vast majority of participants supported full decriminalization, full criminalization with exit programs. And that was in 2009. And then when I did some investigation myself, what happened in Johannesburg, Durban, and Port Elizabeth, similar things happened there. Most people supported the criminalization, keeping the sex industry criminalized, fully criminalized, but helping women exit the sex trade. Now we fast forward to 2017, and you released this report, and it's in line with what happened in those workshops. Am I correct?
That's correct, yes. We had 8 public workshops. We had significant stakeholder meetings as well that weren't open to the general public, because we were dealing with the women themselves. In the majority, it is women that are selling sexual services. So we had specific meetings with them. We had engagement with brothel owners, and some pimps attended as well. So we had specific workshops right through the country. The overall input that we got is that prostitution is inherently exploitative and harmful. Where we found the divergent solution was not always, people didn't always agree as to the solution as such. So you'd find that people came with either very strong views in terms of criminalization, or very strong views in terms of decriminalization. But what was very, very interesting is we didn't really get that moral element in that we were expecting. It was really just a sense of this is exploitative and harmful, and we need to address this as a social ill.
Okay, so those were the workshops that happened around the country in 2009, but then there was a second part to it where you invited the public and organizations to make written submissions to the Law Reform Commission, and I can remember thousands of written submissions were sent in that time to the Law Reform Commission. So maybe tell us about that, and then the process in getting to the conclusions that you did.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, recorded in the report, and as you would see, it's quite a lengthy report. There's over 2,600 submissions, and people who have made submissions will find themselves referenced in the report, because we did give cognizance to it. Of course, it's not a voting contest as to how many votes you got in favour or against, but we seriously investigated and considered the comments that we received. At one point, unfortunately, as I explained to you before, my computer crashed after receiving too many of the same emails over and over again. But it's good. The public engagement was significant and meaningful, and I think it definitely did inform the process. But not only that, the comparative law that we looked at informed a very evidence-based report. So what you'd find in terms of what is happening internationally, and internationally where you have a clawback, was quite interesting to see.
Can I just come in there? When you say clawback, you're talking about nations that have either decriminalized or legalized prostitution. Are they trying to reverse that now?
Oh, absolutely, and that's a very interesting point, and I think that is what time has allowed to actually mature in terms of this debate. So often one wants to apply a Western model to our society, and we needed to have a look what was happening internationally to see what elements we could use and not. And what we've seen in Canada, in Sweden, in France, in Ireland, and a number of the Nordic countries is this clawback, as I refer to it, where the pendulum has swung back from decriminalizing or regulating to, for example, in Canada, bringing it back to a partially criminalized system, where they have found that the rates of murder of women engaged in prostitution is just terrible.
I think, and the decriminalization or partial decriminalization didn't help that.
Not at all. What has actually happened is if you have the exploitation has actually increase in trafficking. You found in places like Germany, for example, where they have their super brothels, that the women are not registering for benefits because they self-stigmatize. They don't want to be you don't want to lose their anonymity. They don't want to be recognized as prostitutes. They're finding that it's not seen as work as any other in that country. In the Netherlands, for example, they're buying back windows that were in the strip that was used for the red light zone, where they're bringing back flower shops and the like because of the urban decay. And they've once again, the Dutch Parliament has recently said, but this cannot be recognized as work, or as something that you would recognize as something as a recognizable form of work.
Yeah, it's so important that you say that, Dellene, because the arguments made here in South Africa for full decriminalization argues all of those points that you just mentioned in places like the Netherlands, in Germany, Canada, where they're pushing back. They once believed this. They decriminalized or legalized prostitution because they wanted to regulate, they wanted to protect the woman, the dignity and all of that. And they've now found it doesn't work. In fact, the opposite is happening. And this is the warnings that we've put out as Family Policy Institute, Doctors for Life, the Christian Lawyers Association and others. I've seen some of the comments in the report, your report, the Law Reform Commission report. And yet we have the pro-prostitution groups insisting that decriminalized prostitution is going to solve the problems here in South Africa, that it's going to protect the dignity of women, it's going to give women access to healthcare, it's going to remove the stigma and remove some of the harms associated with prostitution. And everything your report tells us and what has happened in these nations, it is not so. It is not working. But we're running out of time, Dellene, and in the next segment, I want to talk about these issues. I just want to talk about the criticism that came against the report from pro-prostitution groups, calling it moralizing. And it's important that you said this had nothing to do with moral issues, although it is, in my estimation, a moral issue. But people didn't make those kind of submissions. They were talking more about protecting women, getting them out of the sex industry, because they recognize it is inherently harmful and abusive. So more with Dellene Clarke after the break.
Looking to buy a reliable pre-owned vehicle? Wanting to sell? Or just simply wanting advice? Look no further. Contact RJ Cars, the dealership with a difference. Established and reliable with 2 branches in the heart of Durban, with over 150 vehicles to choose from. We deliver and purchase countrywide. Our fast and friendly dynamic team will gladly assist you. So for all your pre-owned vehicle requirements, whether you're buying, selling, trading in, or just needing advice, we're just a call or a click away. RJ Cars, here for you.
This program is proudly sponsored by Phoenix Industrial and Safety Suppliers. Local manufacturers in safety footwear, hard hats, workwear, and cleaning rags. head office and manufacturing facilities in Johannesburg with retail outlets in Johannesburg, Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town and Polokwane. For more information, please visit our website www.phoenixindustrial.co.za.
Have you ever dreamt of visiting Israel? Of seeing your Bible come to life as you walk the streets of Nazareth where Jesus lived? Worship on a boat on the Sea of Galilee and see where he performed his miracles? Pray with hundreds of believers at the Wailing Wall or get baptized in the Jordan River. Now you can do all of this with Joy Magazine and myself, Errol Naidoo. Join me on a 10-day tour to Israel from 10th to 20th September 2017. But hurry, places are limited. Email info@joytravel.co.za for more details. Welcome back to the program. I'm speaking to Advocate Dellene Clarke, who is a Principal State Law Advisor at the South African Law Reform Commission. And the Law Reform Commission released their report on adult prostitution on the 26th of May this year. The Minister of Justice did that. And we're talking through the processes, the mandate about the Law Reform Commission, because we need to understand how this investigation came about, Dellene, and especially the findings, how you arrived at that. So just tell us a little bit more about the process. We know that there was workshops around the country, that thousands of people participated in that. Then you asked for written submissions, ordinary citizens, respected institutions wrote to you, and then of course you did your own investigation of nations that have either decriminalized or legalized.
I think in terms of process, perhaps I should just explain or unpack what the processes are in terms of the Law Reform Commission.
Okay.
We publish a series of documents that is open to the public for comment, both at issue paper and discussion paper phase. So we have issue papers, discussion papers, and reports. We do intensive legal research in terms of what the current law is. We try and identify what the problems are. We put preliminary proposals out, and we then go to a period of consultation. And that is not only nationally, but internationally as well. Our documents get sent out to international law reform agencies as well. We get comment on our papers that are published, and we then integrate it into the next part of our series. We are engaging with government departments. For example, this is cross-cutting. We have issues relating to tourism, we have issues relating to transport, we have issues relating to the police, the prosecutorial authority. We engage with relevant stakeholders outside of the public stakeholder process. We spoke to women that are actually selling sexual services, people who have exited. We've had submissions and spoken one-to-one with people like Ellen Jordan, the person that was at the forefront of the Constitutional Court case.
That's right.
So all of this information informs the report, but it is evidence and legally based. So we had to go back to our foundation, and that's the Constitution. And in terms of our Constitution, the Constitutional Court found in 2002 that the Sexual Offences Act and criminalising sexual offences is a constitutionally permissible legislative choice. So that was our foundation. We found that it does not contravene in terms of our constitutional law any of the rights contained in the Constitution. So in terms of developing the law, we needed to see whether there was any policy choice that needed to be made in terms of implementation and how we could look at processes to implement the law, and whether we needed to put options out there to allow government to choose a different policy option. Currently, the policy option is criminalization. We have made a particular proposal in terms of our recommendations based on the evidence that we found and the comparative analysis that we've done, that it would be harmful to change the current law. It would actually create an arena for greater abuses and for further exploitation.
So how do you respond to groups like Sweat and others that are saying the Law Reform Commission let women down? because there's so much abuse, there's murders, there's rapes, there's all kinds of things happening in the sex industry to women, and decriminalization would have solved those problems. That's the arguments they make. So in order to uphold the dignity of women in prostitution, to protect them and their human rights, to decriminalize the sex industry is going to help that along. But you found something completely different to that, and tell us about that.
I think it's important to know that the legislature has an obligation to address social ills and, where appropriate, to use the criminal law. We needed to look at the criminal law as it is and to see whether the arguments that were brought against the current situation were valid or not. Internationally, we found that the arguments do not hold as such. You're finding an increase in exploitation. You're finding a dual model of legal and illegal activity taking place, even in the country that is put forward as the model for decriminalisation, New Zealand. It is indeed actually not a totally decriminalised system. It is a regulated system or legalised system where if you're on the street, you are still a criminalised person. And that is where the majority of the people still are.
On the street in New Zealand?
Yes, unless you can be part of a collective. And if you're not part of that collective, you're still criminalised. They, for example, have a totally different context to what South Africa has. For example, they're landlocked. We have porous borders. They have a very small population of about 5 million people. We can compare that to what we have in South Africa. They have very little illegal immigrants. They don't allow anybody that's not a citizen to engage in legal prostitution either. Now, if we look at what's happening in South Africa, where you have the majority of people engaging in sexual services for sale, the people are illegal immigrants who are not able to get work otherwise. So it's a very different context.
And a number of the organized crime networks that control the prostitution industry are also from other nations. We have a number of Nigerians involved in it, connected to sex trafficking. And so, the arguments that pro-prostitution groups are making and continue to make for decriminalized prostitution makes no sense. If you consider all the factors, and you mentioned a few of them, other issues that we have to contend with is the high rates of unemployment, the high rates of poverty in South Africa, which New Zealand and Germany and the nations you have mentioned, Canada, they don't have to grapple with that. So the context is so much different for South Africa that if we went the route of decriminalization and then talking about the issues of the police, for example, there's a lot of corruption in the police, there's a lot of abuse in the police, and we're going to be relying on the police to regulate this properly. How is that possibly going to happen?
I think we must understand that, if one's unpacking the arguments that you was just spoken to, I mean, there's three main arguments that are put on the table essentially. And the one relates to whether prostitution is work or exploitation. The other relates to whether it actually affects your access to healthcare and the whole HIV pandemic. And the third one relates to the abuse and exploitation. And I think you would slot in the abuse and exploitation of the police that you refer to there.
Yes.
Now, this is not across the board. I mean, what we're dealing with here, and I mean, this argument was raised in the Constitutional Court as well. It's not a constitutional defect. It's about the application of the law. And what police are doing that are abusing the law is just that, abusing the law. They're not entitled to do that. They're not affecting the law. And
there's laws in place to deal with that.
Correct.
We don't have to decriminalize prostitution to deal with police abuse.
Not at all. Once we've actually unpacked the actual processes, and that's part of this investigation, is to unpack the processes, we found out that the police don't have a national instruction to deal with adult prostitution in place at this stage. They've got a national instruction for all other sexual offences, and that is why in the Law Reform Commission report, we not only make legislative recommendations, but non-legislative recommendations, which include that there is specialisation within the police. We include a specific recommendation around a national instruction so that the police know exactly what they're meant to be doing. And if they're not doing that, that the public can report it. And aside to that, that then there would be internal disciplinary hearings or they would be dismissed.
Okay, now the access to a health issue, that also is a huge argument in that we know that prostitution or the sex industry is a public health crisis. rates of STDs and HIV/AIDS is high in the sex industry. And they're saying the reason for that is because women in the sex industry do not have access to healthcare. And if you decriminalize it, it's going to help that along. What did your report find?
Well, I think that's a little bit disingenuous because healthcare is available to anyone. It is not dependent on what your profession is. It may sound strange to say, but being a prostitute is not a criminal offence. It's engaging in that behaviour that is. So if you present at a healthcare clinic, you are entitled to access healthcare. Yes, we may need to deal with stigma and the way in which healthcare professionals deal with vulnerable groups. Once again, that's a non-legislative recommendation in the report. That is an issue, on how you're actually engaging. But healthcare is available. South African National AIDS Council has rolled out a national sex worker HIV plan on the 11th of March 2016, and this provides for a national plan for prevention, care and treatment. It provides for pre-exposure and early treatment, and it has been lauded in the 2017-2022 report as a major stride in response to HIV, TB and STIs. So this is irrespective of what the legal framework is. This rollout has taken place, and there's also been a massive rollout of condoms together with that.
So there is healthcare available to women in prostitution then?
Absolutely, and there's specific vans that have gone out as well where they provide services at particular times to the women where they would need to access services.
Okay, what is your response to arguments made that also the woman needs regular checks, but it doesn't require that men that buy sex go for regular checks? How would that address the issue of health in the sex industry?
Well, the way that I understand it actually makes no sense at all, because mandatory health checks for women doesn't, like you explained, doesn't actually link to the cause of the infection, which is mostly as a result of from the man. So your healthcare professionals would tell you that if you're not testing both parties, it doesn't make any sense to test the one. In addition to that, in terms of healthcare, I mean, if you were to legalize, that's not going to mean that you're going to have an uptake in the use of condoms. The recent HSRC study found that condom uptake is at an all-time low, particularly in the age group of 15 to 24, where there's age-disparate relationships, which indicate prostitution, where you have a young girl and a much older man, for example. What you'd have as well with legalization is you would have more clients, for example, which will mean that you'll have competition, and a woman would more regularly then say, well, for a higher price, I'd be willing to forego the condom. And our healthcare professionals also say that the use of condoms is not something that your average man in South Africa engages in using.
Yeah, and research that we've seen from other nations that have either decriminalized or legalized also show that Johns or men that buy sex actually pay a higher price not to use a condom, and this is why diseases spread in the sex industry the way it is. So health checks, I think, is a misnomer. I don't think decriminalization is going to help that issue. There's other things we have to put in place, but decriminalizing the sex industry, I think, is going to create more problems than it is solutions. I want to talk about the word sex work. You did refer to it, where the pro-prostitution groups are pushing that terminology. We see that in the mainstream media, sex work, even government officials using that. But I see in the report, you guys decided against that, using prostitution as the term. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that. So more with Dellene Clarke on the South African Law Reform Commission report on adult prostitution. Don't go away.
Looking to buy a reliable pre-owned vehicle? Wanting to sell? Or just simply wanting advice? Look no further. Contact RJ Cars, the dealership with a difference. Established and reliable with 2 branches in the heart of Durban, with over 150 vehicles to choose from. We deliver and purchase countrywide. Our fast and friendly dynamic team will gladly assist you. So for all your pre-owned vehicle requirements, whether you're buying, selling, trading in, or just needing advice, we're just a call or a click away. RJ Cars, here for you.
This program is proudly sponsored by Phoenix Industrial and Safety Suppliers. Local manufacturers in safety footwear, hard hats, workwear and cleaning rags. Head office and manufacturing facilities in Johannesburg with retail outlets in Johannesburg, Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town and Polokwane. For more information, please visit our website www.phoenixindustrial.co.za.
Have you ever dreamt of visiting Israel? Of seeing your Bible come to life as you walk the streets of Nazareth where Jesus lived? Worship on a boat on the Sea of Galilee and see where he performed his miracles? Pray with hundreds of believers at the Wailing Wall or get baptized in the Jordan River. Now you can do all of this with Joy Magazine and myself, Errol Naidoo. Join me on a 10-day tour to Israel from 10th to 20th September 2017. But hurry, places are limited. Email info@joytravel.co.za for more details.
Welcome back to the program. I'm speaking to Advocate Dellene Clarke of the South African Law Reform Commission, and we're talking about the report on adult prostitution. So Dellene, we want to talk about the term sex work. It's been pushed all over the show, everybody using it in the mainstream media. Does using that term in your investigation, does it remove the stigma from prostitution?
I wouldn't say so. I think what we needed to do in actually choosing our words was to have a look at the narrative. And yes, the narrative in the media you speak to everyone and they understand the word sex work, or they seem to think they do, and that is as prostitution. But when I want to unpack sex plus work, one must actually look at what does it mean. Does it actually mean that you're going to be obtaining labor rights? What does it mean in terms of our employment? And unpacking that is one of the issues that we looked at. But from a law reform perspective, we chose to use the words prostitution because we are signatories to international conventions such as CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which particularly speaks to prostitution. We also are signatories to trafficking protocols and a number of other international instruments. None of them speak to the word sex work. In addition to that, we didn't want to preempt a policy choice. We have a constitutional imperative to have a look at what our current law is and how that it should be interpreted and how it should be developed, if at all. And with that context, we looked at what work was, and we found that the majority of the women are independent contractors, which would mean, although they've been told that they will get labor rights, that is not so. Independent contractors have no rights in terms of the Labour Relations Act. There's no sick leave, no UIF, no time off. There's none of those rights. So it is a little bit disingenuous to speak of it as work. And when one unpacks it in terms of international law and looking at the International Labour Organization, for example, it has not been found to be decent work. And we have a decent work program in South Africa too. It doesn't align with the imperatives there either. I don't think there's anywhere in the world where they would say that because you are poor and impoverished, your only option should be engaging in work as prostitution.
Okay, so part of that report, you talk about Sweden and France have declared prostitution as violence against women. How did they arrive at that conclusion?
I think in terms of Sweden, they're a very strong gender-based country in terms of equality is one of their main underpinnings in terms of their laws. And they've had a look it's not to say they didn't have the pressure towards decriminalization there as well, because they did. But when they unpacked it, they also found that prostitution was inherently harmful and inherently exploitative. And based on that, and also given the fact that they have a very strong social system in place, they were able to decriminalize partially and allow women to not be criminalized as such themselves, but everyone else in the industry to be criminalized. Why we are not suggesting that that is one of our preferred options in South Africa is because we don't have any social network for people that are in the category of 18 to 60 where you're not either eligible for a childcare grant or pension. We don't have anything like that. In Sweden, they allow housing, there's accommodation, there's different social support systems in place. We don't have that, which would mean that if a woman had no other alternatives, she would in any event then engage in more risky behavior, placing herself at more harm.
Okay. And so the report suggests exit programs, maintaining the status quo, which is full criminalization, with exit programs. And obviously government has to set that up. But in your mind, do you see that happening with government maybe empowering NGOs and maybe working with the church to do this, to allow this to happen?
I think a collaborative effort would be ideal. I think what we're looking at here is we already have a diversion system in place that can be applied in the courts. It's not something unique to our courts. So it can be applied and extended in the area of adult prostitution. We have our Department of Social Development who have specific programs in place, and they have partnerships with NGOs and CBOs and religious-based organizations. And I think it's important for people to take hands. I think part of the whole non-legislative recommendations linking into the exit program is looking at collaborative work, looking at specialization, looking at the police and the prosecutors all getting on board and figuring out what is happening in particular communities.
So your investigation was primarily on adult prostitution, but during your investigations and your research, did you come across the issue of child prostitution? Because we know there are numbers of children on the streets.
Absolutely. And this is what was quite interesting, though, because some of the lobby groups that are advocating for decriminalization have intimated that they don't find children. And if they do, that they refer them to social services, but they can't tell us any numbers. And on the other hand, we then have social services and child rights organizations that speak of huge numbers of children on the street. We have found that a person doesn't automatically at 18 decide to become a prostitute. People are actually involved and evolve into that adult role from childhood. And what we found across the board, irrespective of what the lobby groups are, they all agree that you have women that are really coming from environments where they've been raped, where there's been child abuse, where there's family breakdown, and the most horrific circumstances, poverty, inequality, and all of that feeds into them being in prostitution. And some of them have, what we've been told is that some children evolving into this role of selling sex for reward almost feel that they're taking control over the situation, not realizing how harmful it is for them.
Okay. And then we want to talk about the links between organized crime and the sex industry. Research and reports we've seen from other nations suggest that when you decriminalize or legalize the sex industry, you never break the links between organized crime and prostitution. Is that your findings as well?
Yes, it is. And having had specific engagement with the asset forfeiture units, speaking with the police, speaking with the prosecutorial services, speaking with specialist detectives who've actually informed us that that's exactly what happens. You don't just excise it neatly and say, today this is legal, and therefore you leave all the drug trade and everything behind. One of the big things we find that links in is the abuse of substances. And that is why one of the recommendations that we make is that there should be specific attention to the use of substance abuse, both drugs and alcohol, in relation to the social crime.
We've spoken to a number of ex-prostitutes, and most of them say they got into prostitution because they were firstly drug addicts and they needed to get money to support their habit, and so that was the easy way to do that. And then the pimp becomes the pimp and the drug trafficker, the person that supplies the drugs. So that is well known in the sex industry, that drugs and prostitution go hand in hand. But now that we have the report, and it's a great report. I think it's very balanced. It covers all the aspects, well researched. You've taken into account all the submissions by the public, by respected institutions. And it is now on the desk of the Minister of Justice. But what we do know is that the African National Congress, the ruling party, do not have a policy yet on prostitution. They have taken the report. They're going to obviously have to hammer out a policy for the nation. And we don't know what that's going to be. But what happens next now with the Department of Justice? What is the next move?
Well, I think I'd just like to clarify for you that we do have a policy, and the existing policy is criminalization at this point in time. A policy choice has not been made to change the current system as of now. What Cabinet has done is it has acknowledged the fact that the Department of Justice was going to release the report and noted the department's intention that they're going to be engaging with the public on the report, and thereafter will revert back to Cabinet with a recommendation on whether we need to support the recommendations made in the report or come up with a different policy choice. Up until then, the policy choice is clear, that the existing policy choice is criminalization.
But we see a lot of lobbying going on in South Africa by pro-prostitution groups, even foreign organizations coming in here pushing for decriminalization. The media seems to be getting behind this, the mainstream media. So how does this still influence government? Because we still have the ANC conference in December where they're going to finalize policy. Could they still be influenced?
As I've said, it's a policy choice. So if government finds evidence to sway its view in terms of moving towards a different legislative model because it believes that would best address the social ill of prostitution, of course that would be up to government to do. It's really a choice at that point in time.
Okay, and another argument that's been put forward is partial decriminalization, and they make the argument, like people like Embrace Dignity, for example, that if you decriminalize the woman, because it's secondary victimization if they criminalized as well. You decriminalize the woman, but you keep the focus of law enforcement on the demand side, which is the men that buy sex, the brothel owners, the pimps, organized crime. You focus your attention on that, and then you help the woman get out of the sex industry by decriminalizing them. So through your study, do you believe that could work in the South African context?
I think in the South African context, given the poverty that we're experiencing, the unemployment, given our porous borders, and the whole context seen as a whole, I don't believe it could work here.
Yeah, because it could be abused. And you know, the managing of this whole thing, if you partially decriminalize, just so our viewers understand, if you decriminalize the woman and the demand side remains criminalized, then you need a good law enforcement to manage this, to make sure that the brothel owners are prosecuted, shut down, pimps, organized crime, and at the same time that we get women out of the sex industry. And you know, I think everybody knows in South Africa that we're facing huge challenges with law enforcement. If you just look at what's happening in the South African police services, the NPA, the Hawks, leaders, officials being investigated themselves, we just can't see this happening. But we do feel for the woman. For us from Family Policy Institute, we want to, and the submission we made, is to help get women out of prostitution, because we agree with your report, Dellene, that it is inherently harmful and exploitative. And whether you decriminalize that, partially decriminalize it, you never ever remove the abuse of women. And that is essentially what a decent society should be doing, is removing the harm and the exploitation and the abuse of women. So Dellene, Clarke, we want to thank you for coming all the way from Pretoria. Thank you for the work you've done, the excellent work you've done on this report. And I know you're working on an investigation on pornography and children, and maybe we can get you in back to the studio later to talk about that as well. But thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Next up, we speak to Dr. Albie van Eden of Doctors for Life about their view on the report on adult prostitution.
Looking to buy a reliable pre-owned vehicle? Wanting to sell? Or just simply wanting advice? Look no further. Contact RJ Cars, the dealership with a difference. Established and reliable with 2 branches in the heart of Durban, with over 150 vehicles to choose from. We deliver and purchase countrywide. Our fast and friendly dynamic team will gladly assist you. So for all your pre-owned vehicle requirements, whether you're buying, selling, trading in, or just needing advice, we're just a call or a click away. RJ Cars, here for you.
This program is proudly sponsored by Phoenix Industrial and Safety Suppliers. Local manufacturers in safety footwear, hard hats, workwear, and cleaning rags. Head office and manufacturing facilities in Johannesburg with retail outlets in Johannesburg, Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town, and Polokwane. For more information, please visit our website www.phoenixindustrial.co.za.
Have you ever dreamt of visiting Israel? Of seeing your Bible come to life as you walk the streets of Nazareth where Jesus lived? Worship on a boat on the Sea of Galilee and see where he performed his miracles? Pray with hundreds of believers at the Wailing Wall or get baptized in the Jordan River. Now you can do all of this with Joy Magazine and myself, Errol Naidoo. Join me on a 10-day tour to Israel from 10th to 20th September 2017. But hurry, places are limited. Email info@joytravel.co.za for more details.
Welcome back to the program. We're talking about the South African Law Reform Commission's report on adult prostitution. It's my privilege to invite Dr. Albie van Eden from Doctors for Life into the studio. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, Dr. Albie, you made a submission to the South African Law Reform Commission on the issue of prostitution law reform. It was a powerful submission. You highlight all of the medical issues associated with the sex industry. And you were referred to in that 358-page report several times. But this argument to decriminalize prostitution that pro-prostitution groups are making, and that it would help and protect the health of women in the sex industry. What is your response to that?
I think it's totally false and incorrect what they are saying. There's no way in which legalizing slavery is going to help slaves. Slavery must be abolished and removed, and totally removed. When you look at medical statistics, and there are very powerful studies done on women. You find that about 60% plus of them develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder is a condition first diagnosed with American soldiers who came from Vietnam, who witnessed the dropping of napalm bomb on villages, and seeing little children running around on fire, rolling around trying to quench the fire. And the same symptoms which they develop, by the way, PTSD is the most serious mental condition that doctors or psychiatrists can measure in a person. And those same symptoms are experienced by 60% of girls in prostitution, or women in prostitution. Now, here's the very important factor. The study have gone over a few continents, I think about 5 or 7 continents, and they found that across the board, whether prostitution was performed in a legal, in an illegal background, against the illegal background, or against the legal background, there was no difference in the prevalence of PTSD. And what does that show us? It shows us that the harm done by prostitution is because of the inherent characteristic of the activity. So whether a girl does it in a legal setting doesn't remove in any way the harm that is done by this.
Okay, so what is your response to some of the arguments, even in government circles, that if you decriminalize or legalize prostitution, a woman would be able to go for regular health checks? And this obviously is going to reduce or eradicate the STDs and HIV prevalence in the sex industry.
We presented that in the first court case in 2002 of the ranch, where we also testified. A lot of our evidence came from there, actually, that we resubmitted to the Law Commission. And we are deeply and intensely involved in exit programs. It actually, maybe I should just say, stems from the fact that our patients are these women and these girls. and you feel the compassion, you see the need, you see how they are being harmed, and that's how we got dragged in deeper into the matter. And now we have these exit programs, which are extremely rewarding and wonderful to see the results of. But during our research, we found that many of the brothel owners came out with the fact that actually they had, look, you must realize doctors are not all ethical people. There are very unethical doctors, and there are criminals amongst doctors. So they testified, the brothel owners, how they would, or the pimps, how they would give the doctor a payment, and then the doctor would just monthly send out a clear evaluation for them, for the girls working for them, saying there's nothing wrong, without even having seen the patients or the women, without having examined them. So it's all just with really a big facade.
Yes.
And that's what was our experience. The legalizing prostitution across the world is driven by brothel owners and pimps rather than the prostitutes.
Yeah,
they do have a few
crime.
girls in prostitution who stand for it, but to a large extent not.
Yeah, and the report from the Law Reform Commission, they recommended to government maintaining the status quo, which is the criminalization of all aspects of the buying and selling of sex. But they also recommend exit programs, like what you've been saying, state-aided or state-supported exit programs. Would that work in South Africa, considering the high levels of unemployment and all the other issues that we are facing? How can exit programs work and be sustained? Could the church come in and support this as well?
Well, up till now, the NGOs and the church have been doing it. The government hasn't done anything. So I think all the NGOs that are doing it would welcome a little bit of government help. But I think it could definitely work. You must remember, a girl that comes from the rural areas of KwaZulu, for that matter, and that cannot really get a job. She doesn't have good qualifications. There's one thing that everybody has, and that's a body. And so they start making money from the body, through their bodies. But the longer they are in prostitution, the further they are falling back behind their peers. The peers are getting qualifications, they are getting jobs, they are improving in the job, they're getting better pays. She stays behind, and the older she gets, the less money she can charge. And so the chances for her to exit is becoming more and more difficult. And so the earlier you can get hold of such a girl and start teaching her certain skills, and that's what we've been doing. Give them a grade 12 qualification, teach them all kinds of skills with which they can generate an income. The earlier you can do it, the better. And they welcome it. Oh, yeah. They are very thankful.
And I think that is what the report is proposing as well. But as a medical organization that you belong to, Dr. Albie, Doctors for Life, is an alliance of more than 1,000 doctors. Your research, what has it shown as far as the sex industry in South Africa is concerned when it comes to health issues, STDs, HIV/AIDS? Is it higher in that industry than generally in society?
Well, of course, you know, certain STDs like HPV, which is the cause of cervical cancer, the cause of cervical cancer. At one stage, the most common cause of death amongst women in South Africa. The virus that causes that, the human papilloma virus, is transferred by touch, skin-to-skin touch. So even whether that prostitute would be using a condom or her clients will be using condoms, through skin-to-skin touch, this can be transferred. Somewhere in the pubic area, there can be the virus around, and it can be transferred like that. And so these STDs are spread. Now, you must imagine if this girl has 5 clients a day, or 5 buyers, I should rather say, a day, and she's tested once a month, then you can work out over 3 weeks or 4 weeks how many men she can affect before she's testing positive, even though I've mentioned to you that they don't really mentioned, test these girls positive. So what happens is they are spreading disease, and then of course the buyers who visit these prostitutes go and carry these diseases back to their wives. And so it's carried over from the promiscuous part of society to housewives that are sitting at home, taking care of her children, doing the best of her abilities, and she's getting affected. And then you as a doctor sit and she walks into your room with some kind of weird and wonderful sexually transmitted disease. And you don't know how you're going to tell her how she got it. Because the moment you start moving in the direction of a sexually transmitted disease, she immediately says, "Doctor, I haven't touched another man." So you don't have to be a very clever person to put two and two together and realize, listen, that means it comes from your husband. And sometimes we've experienced very difficult situations where you have to tell the woman that she's got this disease, and then she's got to go and sort it out with her husband if she wants to.
And in your opinion, whether prostitution is criminalized, legalized, partially decriminalized or fully decriminalized, it's not going to change the health implications of the sex industry?
No, we are convinced that it must be totally criminalized, and I think Rhodes Island is the perfect example. Rhodes Island had it decriminalized for about 18, 20 years, odd years in America. They had better policing. The police could not get access to the premises to investigate because it was legal businesses. And 7 of the biggest crime families, I think that's what the public prosecutor said in the court case, the biggest crime families in the USA actually got involved in Rhodes Island's prostitution industry. And that's why they reversed it back again to total criminalization.
So, Dr. Albie, we want to thank you once again for the great work you're doing with Doctors for Life. I think your submission to the Law Reform Commission of South Africa on adult prostitution helped them arrive at the conclusion they did, and we're so thankful that they did. So that's our show for tonight. Thank you for joining us. If you want more information about issues on prostitution, pornography, or comprehensive sexuality education, you can go to our website, familypolicyinstitute.com or cisa.co.za. Good night and God bless you.